And then the Observer in 2006 quoted another American professor. The pro-Israel organizations, he said, have lost control of the debate. For a long time, all they had to deal with were people like Norman Finkelstein or Noam Chomsky, who they could dismiss as loonies of the left. Now they're having to face, for want of a better cliche, the mainstream, people like me, who have a fairly long established record of being social democrats, and certainly not on the crazy left, saying very critical things about Israel. Now, the first professor I cited was Omer Bartov, a university chair at Brown University. The second professor I cited, the one who said every word I write is a lie, all invention, just check his footnotes, that was Peter Novick from the University of Chicago. The third professor I cited, who referred to Professor Chomsky and myself as loonies of the left, the crazy left, that was one of the panelists this afternoon, Tony Judd. Now, I think that's legitimate. I don't have a problem with that. You have to be able to take it also. This sort of incivility is, in my view, it's permissible, although it becomes unserious, which is something different, if the ad hominems are not supported by or become a substitute for reasoned argument. Had I simply said that Professor Dershowitz was a plagiarist, falsifier, misrepresenter of evidence, and so forth, without documenting it, I think that would have been a serious violation of my responsibility. That's not what I did. I sat down and wrote a book because I recognized the charges were serious, and I documented them over 300 pages. It's not my fault when I did my homework, as it were, as a professor. He then wrote 160 pages single-spaced, because the correspondence has now come out through FOIA, 160 pages single-spaced correspondence trying to suppress publication of the book. I did my job, and I grant, had I not done that, it would have been irresponsible. Now, Professor Mearsheimer, I'm not sure if he's still here, he does raise the serious question of, does my incivility undermine my effectiveness and my scholarship? I think it's a reasonable question. The only answer I can give is, my model is perhaps not his model. As a young man, for better or for worse, I spent many hours poring over the writings of people like Karl Marx, and whatever you want to say about his views, I don't think anyone serious would deny what he himself said about his capital. He was quite proud of it. He wrote to Engels that capital was a triumph of German science and scholarship. But if you open up Capital, this is not written according to University of Chicago style. There isn't a single contemporary of his economist who he's not very uncivil to. In the first few pages, which I was looking over last night, he describes Bastiat as a dwarf economist, Roche as guilty of eclectic professorial twaddle. Gano, he says, his is a miserable work. He refers to J.B. Say's absurdity and triviality. And I have to say, it's always been painful for me, because I have a very warm spot in my heart for Mill. He's absolutely vicious on John Stuart Mill, in a line which often I just wish were not in Capital. He writes about Mill, On a level plain, simple mounds look like hills, and the insipid flatness of our present bourgeois is to be measured by the altitude of its great intellects. Well, not the nicest thing to say about Jon Stewart. One last word. In my view, most of this talk about civility is a red herring. When you consider that our best universities eagerly recruit indubitable war criminals, whether it was Columbia that sought out Kissinger, whether it was Georgetown, which employed Kirkpatrick, or Stanford, which now has Rumsfeld. When you consider that many professors, as Professor Said put it, looking back at the Vietnam War, he said many of these professors were discovered to be working, sometimes secretly and sometimes openly, on such topics as counterinsurgency and lethal research for the State Department, the CIA, or the Pentagon. When you consider that professors in our best universities advocate torture and the automatic destruction of villages after a terrorist attack, when you consider all this, when you consider all this, it becomes clear that the question of civility, whether one treats his or her critics according to Emily Post's rules of etiquette, however real the question is by comparison a meaningless sideshow or just a transparent pretext for denying a person the right to teach on account of his or her unpopular political beliefs. Thank you.
I think we've ended on a very high note. This has been quite an impressive gathering. All of you have sat here since 2 o'clock. It's now 6:15. Some of our panelists have to leave by 6:30. There are lots of books outside, including Norman's books and books by other panelists available. So I think we should thank this panel, thank Norman. And it's very healthy, I think,